Hey everyone, welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do us one teeny tiny little favor. Make sure to leave us a follow so I can keep on bringing amazing guests like the one I have on today. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Dr. Lynn, for anyone that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And we're excited to hear about you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm also a karma master, and I am a certified yoga therapist. I published a series of books. I produced DVDs, a TV show. Let's say I've been around the holistic health and fitness field for over 30 years. I'm a busy lady.
Busy and having a ton of fun doing it. I was looking into some of the things you had going on. It's like you have a ton of energy. And so it's like, it's amazing to see, still pushing through as if you never took your foot off the gas. So that's exciting. So I'm excited to talk to you today. And I think a great place to start on your walk to wealth. I looked into you a little bit. And so you grew up in Maine. Tell us a little bit about what was your childhood like? What was your upbringing like in your home? What was the concept of like money and like abundance in your family? Is that something that had to learn as you got older? Or is that something that was kind of instilled early on?
Well, I grew up on an island off the coast of Maine in a little fishing village, and everybody was dependent upon everybody. We had didn't have a doctor, we didn't have a grocery store, we didn't have anything. We were all dependent upon what we got from the island and supporting each other. But I grew up, it was a very rich environment in terms of nobody ever went without. If somebody was sick or somebody was out of work or whatever, everybody in the community was feeding them or helping everybody out. It's just the way it was. Everybody took care of everybody. So I kind of grew up in it. It was not wealthy at all. I mean, we didn't have telephones and some of us didn't have indoor plumbing. I mean, it was not a wealthy place at all, but yet it was extremely rich because we could always make money somehow.
Yeah.
There was always some way to make money, whether it was going out with the fishermen or selling the lobsters or whatever. But it was also rich in culture because there were so many stories. And the most important thing I learned from my childhood was a work ethic. And that was that you always pitched in and worked. And it was just part of what we did. And that work ethic has carried me through my life.
Yeah. So let me ask you a little bit, because it brings up a really interesting point. You mentioned some of the people don't have indoor plumbing. That meant that before we hit record, I told you about my time in DR. And while I was there, so they also didn't have like indoor plumbing. Or they didn't have modern indoor plumbing. And I went in 2019, and I kid you not, like there was a giant like tub of water, like a giant like 5-foot tub of water, like a tank kind of thing. And you would have to, when you wanted to flush, scoop out with a bucket the water and like pour it into the toilet so it could flush itself. And that was only in 2019, which is not too far back. So like it definitely is something that's very humbling. And like for me, I grew up in inner city, so we had tons of people. So what was it kind of like, growing up in somewhat like a more tight knit, smaller community? You mentioned how everyone kind of pitched in to work. What other, I guess, cultural differences that you learned there that has helped you in your journey? That someone that might have grown up in more like mainland, I guess, the US, like I'm closer to New York City. So all we know is cars and rush hour traffic and rush.
Right. Well, it was interesting because everybody's door was opened and everybody's keys stayed in the car. And one of the reasons for that is most people, if they were lucky, they had one car, and some people didn't have a car. So if there was ever an emergency or anything, you needed a car, you just jumped in somebody's car and left a note on their doorstep and said, hey, I'll be back with your car in an hour. I got to go take my kid to the doctors or whatever you had to do. So it's a very, very open place. You walked in, I would walk into my aunt's and we'd all sit down and have something to eat. I mean, so it was very, very much open. And I would say that's a good way. But when I stepped out into the real world, I was extremely naive because I trusted everybody. I thought everybody was coming from the same place I was coming from. And it was a real learning experience to come out into the bigger world.
Yeah. So let me ask you, at what point in time did you start to get into the work that you have going on now? Was it something like in your late teens and early adulthood that you kind of had your eyes set on and knew you wanted to pursue? Or did you kind of figure it out somewhere along your journey you came across it?
Well, I have, as I said, I grew up in a very organic environment, and our environment, everything was like folk medicine. My grandmother would make up potions, and that's how we took care of ourselves. So I kind of grew up not taking medicine and not going to doctors. And we did, but it was like you used what was in nature first. So I grew up in a very outdoor nature environment. I was a single mother in my 20s with 2 children, and I hadn't finished my college education, and I was broke. I mean, broke. I was on the welfare line. And I decided that the only way I was going to get myself out of that was to go back to school. So I put myself into the University of Maine, and I took scholarships and grants. I took work study, everything I could to get myself through. I finished. When I finished, I collapsed. And I collapsed because I had reached this point where physically, mentally, and soulfully, I had been going a million miles an hour through all those balls up in the air. And it was a physical and mental and soulful collapse. And to come back from that collapse, I went back to my roots and I said, I've got to get back to diet. I've got to get to holistic stuff to rebuild my body, get back eyes. I need to put all those things together. And from that, it got me to open more doors, open more books, start to seek a master's, then a PhD, and eventually end up as a naturopathic doctor.
That's amazing. And it's crazy how like every entrepreneur story always kind of has that one like pivotal turning point that just like snaps them out of it, or whether it's getting to a point of complete burnout. I've heard stories of people going close to borderline bankruptcy, closing businesses down, like losing everyone. There's one guy that I interviewed before was like borderline suicide. I've interviewed guys that were homeless, and then it's always in those deepest, darkest moments that something just shifts in their mind and it just pulls them out of that dark space and helps them to get back on track. So I think that's a great segue kind of into today's conversation a little bit. You found success in your, many little niches within your area of holistic health and wellness and yoga. What was the first step getting out of that dark hole that after you experienced that burnout, you finally made it and what was that first step? You mentioned going back to reading and going back to your roots. Did you start your business right there, or did you go more into like the educational route and continued learning before you started?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take me back to Maine many, many years ago. And there was very few opportunities, even in Portland, Maine, which is the biggest city. Maine's a very rural state. And at the time, Maine was very, very rural. So I went to work in the real estate business. I was a broker. I became a broker because that's how you could make money to support your kids. I had to support the kids. That was number one. And so I went to work and I was the marketing director for commercial construction and development companies in the Portland area. It was a big thing at the time. And it wasn't my passion, but it paid the bills. So I did the things on the sideline. I'd come home and I would cook and make things and develop recipes and think about health. And I also taught exercise classes after work. I would go to the gym and become an exercise teacher. So I constantly had all of this stuff going. So it was a long process of going to work to different things to make money, because money is when you've got children, you've got to be able to support them. And so I was always looking for the opportunity to make money. And yet at the same time, it was never filling my passion. And the real turning point for me was I was in the garment business. I moved to Los Angeles from Maine. Never driven on a highway in my life. Didn't even know what I was doing. Landed in Los Angeles with my daughter, who was 16 at the time. And I got involved. I'd always had a passion for design, and I'm an artist. And so I got involved in the fashion business, and we made a lot of money in the fashion business. We had a very lucrative business, but it also had, again, a big burnout to it, because as well as you could make a lot of money in the garment business, you could lose your shirt. Like that. It's so easy. And I had partners who were not the most reputable partners. I'm trying to keep the ship going straight, and they're selling goods out the back door or doing side deals behind my back. And so I just said, I can't do this anymore. And that was really the turning point where I said, at the time I had my master's, I said, I'm going to get my PhD in natural health. I'm going to become a naturopathic doctor. That's it. I'm going down that road. And that's exactly what I did.
Right. So let me ask you, you mentioned there's a formula of success, but before we kind of dive into that, what is success to you? Because I feel like it's something that's become so subjective. Everyone is chasing it. No one seems to find it, and the people who do find it seem to find themselves miserable. What is the definition of success now that you've been able to see it both monetarily, but also fill that void that you found that you found was there when you achieved, I guess, success, but
Yeah.
wasn't really fulfilled because you weren't pursuing what you truly wanted to. Now that you've been able to pursue what you wanted to and have achieved success, how would you define success?
Well, first up, we all get caught up in the material world and we start to label success by the house I have, the car I drive. And those are all false sense of success.
Hmm.
Karma and yoga teaches us that that's just part of the material world.
Yeah.
The real definition of success is to set a goal and reach it. That's success. If you get up in the morning and say, my goal today is I am going to work out, I'm going to eat healthy, and that's just for today. And at the end of the day, you can sit down and go, wow, check, check, check. You are
Yeah.
a successful person because all you have is the time you have right now. And so I think the problem is we hang success so much on the material things rather than, wow, I hit a goal.
Yeah.
Small or big goal, as long as you hit that goal, you are a successful person because the failure is the person who never sets and never reaches for those goals, no matter what they are.
Yeah. And that's an amazing definition. And I feel like for me, my definition of success, at least like earlier on in high school, it was more so about making a certain type of money and retiring sooner. But it's like, as I've started to grow and I started to gain more wisdom and interview and talk to a lot of amazing people and you go to conferences and things like that, my definition of success is more so about, it's like a never ending continual pursuit of helping more people, right? That is just, so it's like something that kind of never ends.
Mhm.
And I am successful, relatively speaking, to my own goals. Someone outside looking in may not see it that way, but it's my goals, not theirs. And being okay with that, I feel like it's so important. And so let me ask you, right? How does one who is currently right now, probably in their early 20s, in their late teens, still trying to navigate the way around the world, what is their first step then to kind of find success in their life? What is that first step that they could take so that how do they define success in their own life, regardless of whatever niche or
Mhm.
industry they're trying to get into, and then take the first step to get there?
Well, this probably give a little bit of my age away too, but I have an 18-year-old grandson. And my grandson is about to enter off and go to college. And what I do with my grandboys, I have two grandboys. Grandma takes them to breakfast. We have breakfast, just the two of us alone. And that's when we can really talk about whatever we want.
Yeah.
We can gossip about the family or anything. And I give them an open forum. But I always have said to my whatever is your passion, follow it. As long as it's illegal and you're not hurting anybody, don't let anybody ever deter you from what you feel is your passion and what is you, what is the essence of you. Because too many times, and parents, they think, well, okay, now you got to go get a law degree or you got to be a doctor or you got to do this because you got to make a living. You do have to make a living, but I know some very miserable millionaires. I really do. And because they have all this money, but they're not
Yeah.
happy. It doesn't fill your soul. And that's the most important thing, is to tap into what's called the essence of who you are. We all know who we are. We all know our essence. We all have this unique thing called essence. We're never taught to tap into that and to
Yeah.
have that be who you are.
So let me ask you, it reminds me of a quote that a lot of people say, like, I'd rather cry in a Ferrari than cry in a Honda, right? But I'd rather be happy in a Honda than cry at all, right? So it's like a lot of people try to place the materialistic things. It's like, oh, I'd rather cry in a Benz or a Beamer or whatever kind of fancy car or nice
Yeah.
house, whatever. But it's like, I'd rather be happy on a bike with no car than have all the money to buy all the things and still
Yes.
can't find happiness, right? So then let me ask you, right? That inner essence, that inner us, that inner child, like a lot of the times people try to find them and it's always been there. It's just we have to uncover it, right? We have
Mhm.
to get back down. So between all the social media and all the schooling and indoctrination and all these different marketing messages that we get slammed with from all these different commercials and everything, it's hard to kind of start peeling back the onion a little bit because once you get into the adult world, as you said, you had kids and you had to kind of work. The only thing was paying on the bills. For us, it's like a closer to my age. Some people are probably working. Some people are still in school trying to figure themselves out. How do we get back to discovering who we truly are? Like a lot of time
Mhm.
people kind of have a feeling and then it just gets pushed down and pushed down until we end up getting to a point where we're just entirely lost and we don't know who we are. Right. So how does one start beginning to peel back the onion so we can kind of uncover some of these layers that we have?
Mhm. Well, first off, when you're young children, they have it. I have a
Yeah.
4-year-old granddaughter and she's very creative and artistic and she's free, totally
Yeah.
free. But then we have this system that makes you conform
Yeah.
because we want our little soldiers, we want everybody to be a little soldier and conform and pay their taxes and do all that stuff. It's the way the world is created. But what happens is what karma teaches us is that there's always an inclination. There's always something that draws you out. And it's when you stop and you start looking at what are those things that I'm drawn to? Like, for example, when I was a young child, I used to love to mix and match and put clothes together. I just loved colors
Mm.
and designs. And it didn't make any sense growing up in a little island, a fishing village. I mean, who's going to be a designer, but
Yeah.
that was a passion that I had. And it was when I finally allowed myself to peel that back and say, this is something I could get lost in for the moment. That's when I found pure joy in my life. So it's
Yeah.
looking at the little things. And if you get really quiet and listen, you'll notice that I'm always drawn to, let's say you love sports, for example. I'm always
Yeah.
drawn to that. I always want to go there. I always want to draw. I always want to listen to music. Whatever it is that fills you, that's a direction you should be trying to move your life.
Yeah, no, and just from you saying that, it makes you reflect back on when I played football. And football has played a major, major role in my personal growth as in my journey, but physically, mentally, emotionally. Emotionally was probably one of the biggest. And usually when you think football, you think tough. But like emotionally, I grew so much from football because it's probably the first time ever where I was able to truly experience what it's like to be present and in the moment. Like so in the moment that like after the game, if you had asked me what happened, I can't tell you anything. I might have remembered. You would ask me after the game, I might be able to tell you maybe off the top of my head, like maybe 5 or 6 plays because I was so present and in that moment. And it's like, it's kind of hard to kind of tap back into that state of like absolute like presence in like being in the moment. I don't even know how to describe it kind of,
The
but like,
flow. It's called the
yeah,
flow.
the flow state. Yeah, the flow state. And of course it was happening sometimes in basketball too. It's like when I'm in flow state with basketball, it feels like the hoop is like a a giant pool and like anything I throw up is just going in. It's like entering that flow state. I want to ask you a little bit while on this topic a little bit. For anyone that doesn't really understand like the concept of that flow, right? Can you break it down in like layman's terms for someone that is not into the holistic practice of seeing? What is that flow state, and is there a way to kind of artificially tap into it? Because for football, I didn't try to tap into it. I was just like, myself because I love the sport so much. I love to play. I just kind of entered it. But is there kind of a way to enter it like through like intentionally entering it, or is it something that you kind of just find yourself in sometimes?
There's tons and tons of research of the zone, the flow, how to get there. And people who are highly creative artists, and I know when I'm writing, I'm totally there. There's nothing around me. I'm totally in the moment when I'm doing that kind of stuff. So that's where it's really important. One of the easiest ways to understand it is to listen to music. And this is why. When you are listening to music, you can't be behind the beat or before the beat. You got to be on the beat. That's where you are. That's the present moment. And that's one way to bring it in, because listening to music, you're right there all the time. You never lose it as long as you're tapped into that. And I'll give you an example. I teach spin cycle classes, and I always bring in this thing called the zone. And I always make all of the people on the bike, they have to close their eyes and they have to they have to get right on the rhythm, the beat, and not let up and stay there, clear their mind, and it takes them to that place called the zone. And I can tell you that I have had so many students come up to me and say, don't ever take the zone away, because it might be the only time that there's nothing but them, the bike, the music, the moment. That's really that's a really quick way to be able to get there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when you get into that zone, I know they've been starting to do studies because a lot of people have been interested in that. And it's something that we've been doing kind of like for years now. But like when it comes to the zone, from what I've learned and heard, is that you're able to kind of, your dopamine kind of like spikes a little bit. And so it's like you're able to like become like absolutely focused on doing whatever it is that you're doing and things like that. So I've been learning about it a lot more recently, and it's super exciting to, see where this all goes. Because as I said, being an athlete, is stuff I kind of grew up doing, but not ever understanding. So kind of finally getting back to that place where like reflecting and seeing
Mhm.
how it all comes together and how it all makes sense is like super exciting to hear about and learn. Yeah.
Well, that is karma. And karma
Yeah.
would say that you had this wonderful experience in sports, but
Yeah.
you were aware and you were able to take that and take it out. Some people never get that. They never get
Yeah.
what's going on. They're into the competition, but they don't understand that there's an underlying essence to everything we do. And when we learn through those experiences, that's how we can turn our life in different directions. And that's what karma is about. It's about learning your lessons and taking your life and turning it in a direction that takes you down a positive road.
Yeah. So then let me ask you, what would you say is the lesson that brought you down to make this a thing where you wanted to help others with it? Because a lot of times when we do things for ourselves, we tend to discredit ourselves, or we might not value it as much because it's kind of, for example, you grew up with the holistic health kind of stuff, just
Mhm.
growing up in Maine in a rural town. But a lot of times, like we're good at things, we do things, and we don't really value it because it kind of comes second nature to us. That's just kind of how we always live. What did it take for you to realize, like, hey, this is something that people out there need as well, not just you for yourself and making recipes on your own to feed yourself, but like, what made you realize that this is something that is needed out there in the world, and this is something that can benefit tons of other people?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I looked at traditional medicine and all of and this is not to bash traditional medicine. It's necessary for many things, but there was so many drugs and things going out to people and things that really poison your body.
Yeah,
What I did is I started teaching. I would get up and I would teach classes. And
yeah,
the more I taught, the more people would come up to me and say, how did you know I needed this today? How come you said exactly what I needed? And I began to go, wow, there's something here. People really need this lesson. And I felt within myself, as I would tell them, I'm just the facilitator. There's something coming through me.
yeah,
I'm not anything special. It's just this is coming through me, and it's my job to pass it out to other people. This is my karma to help as many people as I can. And what do I get rewards from it? Yes. And they're not monetary rewards. I mean, I can't tell you the hugs or the tears
yeah,
that have been cried on my shoulder or the times that I've helped somebody, helped them make a turn in their life. You can't put a price on that.
yeah,
And that's when I get up and say, I am a wealthy, wealthy woman. I'm wealthy
yeah.
because I've had those experiences.
Yeah, and I've been experiencing that too in my personal life. I'm very earlier on in my journey in terms of starting things off, but just for an example, like my birthday in 2021, I might have gotten like maybe 5 or 6 people that say happy birthday. And then this past birthday, now that I've started the podcast and then the things that I've done so far, the amount of happy birthdays that I've gotten, and it's just like the amount of people I've been able to like kind of impact and help. And it was like 10x from 20, maybe even more than 2021. And just doing that, it's like the people felt like they had to go out of their way. And it's something so small as just a simple happy birthday. But those little things like matter in the grand scheme of things because people, regardless of how much thought they put into it, they put some thought into it. And just
Mhm.
knowing that and that you're touching people's lives is something that, as you said, there's nothing like it. And knowing that you could help somebody, whatever it is. And back in 12th grade, there's this quote that I got from Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And it was the duty of the enlightened is to enlighten the unenlightened. And it's
Mhm.
something that I've stuck with me. And it's kind of part of the reason for me starting the podcast. And another point that you mentioned too is that you're just a facilitator. And I always say too that the reason I see farther than most is because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And it's not because it's not me. It's the people I've been able to come in contact with. It's all the experience I've been able to learn. You feel me? My faith. It's all that combined and coming out through me is not me. And I wanted to ask you a little bit just because I'm just personally curious. How do you find your voice? Because it's something that most people, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but like, I'm just kind of a little curious. How did you kind of find your voice? Because you mentioned that it's not you, it's the people speaking through you. You're just a facilitator. Did you
Mhm.
always think like that? Or is that something that you kind of like figured out while you were on your path?
I remember as a young child, and I was always a very thoughtful young child, and I used to
Yeah.
wander off on the island, and I remember sitting out on a point, and looking out at the ocean and saying, I want to see the whole world. I want to
Yeah.
go out. And I kept always having this feeling that there was something I was supposed to do. Hadn't a clue. I always knew when I was doing something that I wasn't supposed to do, that it wasn't. I could always feel that tug. It's not what you're supposed to be doing. As soon
Yeah.
as I started to open up and do the things that had nothing to do with making money, because let me backtrack a little bit. When I started in naturopathy and yoga, when I started all of this, we were considered quacks. And it was very hard to make a living, really. I mean, I can remember having to, don't tell anybody that you're seeing me because
Really?
all of it was considered quackery. Now it's commonplace, but
Yeah.
but it didn't matter to me because I knew that I was doing what I was supposed to do. And I knew this was the right path because, as I tell my students and everything, the most important thing in your life is your health. You lose your health, nothing matters. Nothing at all matters the minute your health is gone. Steve Jobs couldn't buy his health.
Yeah.
You can have all the money in the world, but you lose your health. That's it. And so what better thing? And I say to myself every day, I get up every day and I teach people and I help people to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Wow, what a blessing, and it is not the most lucrative business in the world. Just isn't,
Yeah. And the beauty of it too is that while helping these other people, you're keeping yourself healthy as well. So it's like it's a win-win on both sides, right?
Exactly.
So I wanted to ask you because you kind of remind me a little bit of my grandmother in terms of, and that's not to say you're old. I'm just saying that with my grandmother, when I was younger, she grew up in Dominican Republic and she was more into the natural remedies. And as she got, I guess, more Americanized, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, it's like now it's like everything is medicine, medicine, medicine. No more teas, no more homemade like ginger concoctions with all the things and stuff like that. It's none of that anymore. It's just her first go-to is medicine. So, and forgive me if I mispronounce it, but naturopathy. Naturopathy. There we go. Naturopathy. For anyone that didn't know that this is actually like a science, right? Because a lot of time we grow up in Caribbean households and this is kind of just like household things that we find, and as we never think much of it. It's just kind of how we grew up. What is naturopathy, and how has that science kind of been able to, I guess, advance in the past decade or so?
Okay. Well, the philosophy of a naturopathic doctor is that you have to bring balance to the body, mind, and soul. You can't bring it to one without the other. And traditional medicine just tries to bring it to the body. Psychologists bring it to the mind. Religiously, just bring it to the soul. We work on all three. But my background is biochemistry. And so if you begin to understand the biochemistry of the human being cannot survive on medicine because medicine is chemicals and it's poison. Doesn't mean we don't need antibiotics to clear something up. The problem is once we deplete the microbiota in the system, the medical world doesn't get you to a nutritionist and get you to build the good microbiota back up. The only thing that will rebuild, vitalize, keep the health of the human body is nutrition. You have to have the vitamins and the minerals in there. And that's what folk medicine was all about. Taking things from the natural world and feeding them back into your body. That's what Hippocrates was all about. That's where he was coming from with his, and the difference was Hippocrates, the good thing about him is he kind of brought it into that more scientific as opposed to being just folk medicine out there. He brought the scientific part of it in. But we forget that if you're sick and I have to bring you back, it's going to take a time of building the body back up and putting all those natural things back in. But if I write you a pill, you're going to be okay in 3 hours. That's what we want. We want instantaneous, regardless of what damage it may be doing to the body.
Yeah, I don't think I ever watched a commercial where it's like, side effects include.
And I'm like, I'll take what I've got over your side effects.
And the worst part about it is it's like a beautiful little dog with a baby and they're on the beach and they're having a good time on vacation. And then the side effects are like cancer, liver explosion, brain tumor, and all these gruesome like side effects. It's like, am I getting cured here? Or like, I don't get what the point of this information, this commercial is anymore. Cause it tells you that we have the solution for one thing, but the price of it is all these other things. And it's something that I kind of realized early on that it kind of didn't make sense. And I didn't like, and like for me, I kind of want to ask you too a little bit, cause I'm not too familiar with his work, but I feel like you might be, cause he's kind of, I think, in your area. But Dr. Sebi, are you familiar at all with that name?
No.
No. Okay. But he talked about like alkalinity and how your body has to be like alkaline and things like that. He's passed away. But what can you tell us on that from terms of like making sure that our body stays in like optimal condition? Because from what he says and he teaches is that disease and illness only are born from your body when it's acidic, right? And so if you could keep your body in more of an alkaline state, then it tends to reduce the risk of some of these illnesses and sometimes prevent it or sometimes like reverse the effect of some of these illnesses. So you being a doctor, I wanted to ask you from your expertise, what's your thoughts there?
Well, it has to do with the pH balance in your blood. And yes, we should always be slightly more alkaline than acidic, but we really should be in the middle. You don't want to be overly alkaline or overly acidic. Yeah. And the body has a natural ability to do that if you eat a healthy diet. And that means you're getting the vitamins and minerals. For example, let's say that you're a really heavy meat eater, and that meat eater goes with a lot of French fries and a lot of garbage food. You're going to develop an acidic body, and then you're going to have disease coming in. But if you're eating meat, and then you're eating a salad, and you're eating fruit, and you're eating the whole gambit of what you should be eating, the body is a wonderful machine. The body, what the body does is it's kind of dumb in a way, but it's very smart in another way, because the body goes, I want survival and I want longevity. And the only way I get survival and longevity is if you put the right nutrients in me. That's all the body cares about. It doesn't care about what you eat. You can eat whatever you want to eat. Just give me the fuel that I need. And that's what we forget, that it's really the vitamins and the minerals and the antioxidants and those things that we need to take in to keep the body operating the way it should be operating.
Yeah. So how does one start? Because fast food is something that's on every block of pretty much every urban or suburban city in America, right? So it's like, and we're constantly in this work grind mode, and it's just so much more convenient, right, to get access to easier food. The garbage food is always a lot cheaper in the grocery stores, and groceries now, with the way everything's going, are super expensive, especially organic and the non-GMO and all that stuff. So how does one kind of begin? You mentioned nutrients and minerals. Is there some nutrients that are more important than others? And which minerals should people tend to focus on when trying to start implementing a more holistic diet?
Right. Well, let me just say that I believe that we should really tax junk food and lower the price of good organic food. I mean, that's the big thing that we need to do in this country. It really has to do with a well-balanced diet. And what I teach in my classes is this thing called synergy, a synergistic effect. That means, in a nutshell, that everything in the universe is interconnected. Nothing is separate. A good example of that would be if you take calcium in your body. For the calcium to work effectively, it's got to have a coenzyme called magnesium. They synergistically work off each other. One without the other doesn't do the job. It's just like flushing stuff through your body. So the important thing is not to look at any one particular vitamin or mineral, but make sure that you're getting the whole gambit of all of them. And the real key to your diet is how much do you love and care about yourself? And that's the most important thing, because if you don't love and care about yourself and you don't take care of your health, there's nothing you can do for anybody else. And so it's a matter of, I know what you're saying, especially when you're young and you're working, and if you've got kids, it's so easy to whip into McDonald's and give the kids McDonald's for dinner because you're tired. But it's just as easy to make that food up ahead of time, put stuff in the freezer, always have in the refrigerator, or always have a bowl of fruit somewhere, and let the kids grab that instead of a bag of candy, So it depends upon what you care about yourself. And for me, I come back to the most important thing is your health. Don't let it go.
And so let me ask you, what are some of like the biggest misconceptions when it comes to eating healthy. Because a lot of times, like for me, one thing I like to do personally is intermittent fasting. Partially, I used to do it for like the physical and health benefits, but not as much just so like mental clarity that I get from it. But also, it makes it easier for me to not overeat when I intermittent fast, and I get all the calories I normally would get in a short period of time. But when it comes to a more holistic diet and eating healthier, what are some like the common misconceptions that most people give you when it's when they we tell them about this stuff and they're still throwing objections as to, oh, my life is this or X, Y, Z. What are some of the most common misconceptions that people have about eating a healthier diet and having a more holistic health approach to life?
I'm so stressed. And it's like, well, yeah. Okay. Now let's decompress here. And
Yeah.
if you're stressed and you use that as an excuse to, let's say, drink too much or eat bad foods or whatever, you're just feeding that. You're like a hamster in a wheel. You're running around and around and around and around. And so that is kind of the misconception. Some people think that I can eat a salad. As long as I'm eating a salad, I can eat whatever else I want, junk, and I've got it covered. That's not true, because you have to have you have to have protein, you have to complex carbohydrates. Those things are very important. All of those things are important to be able to incorporate into your diet. So it comes back to eating a well-balanced diet. Probably one of the best ones out there is the Mediterranean diet. Mm-hmm. Because the Mediterranean diet, I mean, if you come back to it and you really look at it, it's really loaded more with fish, vegetables, and fruit. But there is some meat in there for people and some people have to eat meat. There's plant-based people, there's vegan people, but some people have to eat meat. And I'll give you a good example of this. I was a vegetarian for years and years and years. And then I got really sick and I couldn't get back on and the doctor said, I think you need to add some red meat to your diet. I'm like, oh, I don't think I can eat it, So I started to eat some of it, and it really brought my energy back. And then I read somewhere that the Dalai Lama had the same problem I did, that the Dalai Lama was a vegetarian, and that he ended up having to take a little bit of meat back in because his body needed that.
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating eating meat, but you have to come to what works for your body. And that's what we do. We don't listen to the body. We're all up here and it's all emotions. And that's how we react up here. I'm going to emotionally eat. I'm not going to rationally eat. There's a big difference.
Yeah. And so let me ask, because that's something that a lot of people do. Anxiety, you mentioned earlier, I'm so stressed. Stress eating is like a big thing that a lot of people, I guess, suffer with. And we live here in the US, we have the highest obesity rate of any country in the entire world. And so what's one step this next generation could take to prevent that from continuing to be the case? Because I heard somewhere too that this upcoming generation is going to be the first generation in a long time that lived a shorter lifespan than the prior generation. So what's one thing that, us up and coming can do so that we can prevent this and keep on going on the right track?
It's interesting because I taught my class today, and we always have some kind of a lesson. And one of the lessons today I brought to them was a study that's been done recently. And this study had to do with longevity and quality of life and aging and all of that stuff. And they found that if you take all lifestyle factors out, they didn't bring in diet or anything, they took everything out. The one constant that made a difference was daily. That is the one thing. And we have so much scientific evidence that says every day, get out. I don't care if you do a walk, make it a brisk walk. Don't do you got to really get your arms going and walk. But they found that people who, even if they ate, and I'm not advocating a garbage diet, but if they ate a garbage diet and they really didn't take it, but they exercised every day, they were better off than people who didn't exercise at all. So I think it's really important. And my generation we were the exercise baby boomers. We were the ones that drove really the gym movement and the classes and that stuff. And if that's one thing I could pass on, I would say and I'll share this with you. I mean, I'm 70 years old. I teach cycle classes. I teach dance classes. I teach yoga classes. How did I get here? Every single decade of my life, I said, where do I want to be the next decade? And how am I going to get there? Well, I'm certainly not going to be 70 years old and doing all the things I'm doing and meeting all the goals that I've met if I hadn't have exercised and eaten a healthy diet and taken care of my life. And where do you want to be? Ask yourself that. Where do I want to be? I
Yeah.
know a lot of 40-year-olds that, oh my goodness, they're worse than a 60-year-old, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you said that because you lived this healthy lifestyle for quite some time now. And it shows because there's so many people. So I'm closer, I'm 21. So for me, I'm seeing a lot of people I went to high school with already letting themselves go. And it's like, you do know if you're already letting yourself go, we're not even technically in our prime years yet athletically, right? You don't get this like 25-ish around there. It's like, and you're already letting yourself go. So then every year after that, it's going to be exponentially harder to get back to where you were. So if you don't lose it, it's going to be so much better for you in the long term. But with, this fast lifestyle and everyone wants to go out and club and party and drink and eat fast food and not take care of themselves, all this is very unhealthy lifestyle. And not even just with their diet, but what they consume mentally and
Mhm.
the whole 9 yards, everything is just unhealthy. And it's like me seeing that, it's like, I was talking to someone a couple of days ago and it was just like, yeah, I refuse to let myself go. And it's
Mhm.
not like an aesthetic thing. It just, I know that even right now, I'm not in terms of conditioning wise where I used to be in high school because I used to play sports and everything like that. But it's like, I'm still in very good shape. Like I still play pickup basketball and it's like something that I refuse to let go until I have to let it go. Like,
Mhm.
and just being healthy, I think the athlete in me, I just can't let them die. But even if you're not an athlete, I feel like that's something that you should incorporate into your lifestyle because so many times we don't think long term. And when
Mhm.
entrepreneurship is starting your own business and things like that, it's a lot of these times we get into these hustle spurts where it's like the only thing that we want to do is just focus on work or maybe might be school or might be your family or whatever it may be. But we get into these spurts and then the first thing that always go out the window is always your personal health.
Yeah.
That's the thing we tend to sacrifice most. And I'm just glad to have this conversation where you see that the proof is in the pudding. It works. It's not just, oh, eat a salad. It's good for you. And it's like, live a healthy lifestyle. It's going to pay off. And a lot of young people don't see long term, but like it definitely pays off. So I'm glad I was able to have this conversation with you today. And you dropped a lot of nuggets about like different things in the holistic space and the folk medicine and things like that, and how it's not just some woo woo stuff that people think about. It's like it's scientifically proven. It's backed. So where can we find you at, Dr. Lynn? If people want to go deeper into this, learn more about what you have
Mhm.
going on, and learn more about this holistic practice.
Well, you can go to my website. It's drlynn.com. It's doctorlynn.com. And I am doing, in fact, on the 12th of January, I'm doing a 6-week course. And it's 1 hour each week. And it's really kind of bringing people into natural. So if you've never worked with a naturopath, it's an opportunity to work with one for a lot less money than a one-on-one session with one. So that's kind of how I created it because I think health should be made available to everybody, not just those who have money. It should be available to everybody. So that's a way they can get in touch with me. On there, they can take my yoga classes. There's books, all kinds of stuff. They can read all about me. They can send an email. I answer my email.
Amazing. So now it's time for I still haven't thought of a name. I need to put this on my journal, but the final 5 questions, for lack of a better name so far, that I ask every guest. Number 1 is, what is the most impactful lesson that you learned in life?
The most impactful lesson I learned is when you get knocked down, pull your bootstraps up and get up and keep going. Don't let them knock you down.
Amazing. What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
I would say probably kindness, because that covers a lot of things. Kind people are generous. Kind people are happy. Kind people are grateful. Kindness is a really good trait to have.
If you had to change someone's life, one book, which book would you recommend?
My book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah,
It's my
that's my
book.
favorite book. Yeah, that's my favorite book too. I'm glad you mentioned it. What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
That the most important thing in your life is your health. Cherish it. It is truly your wealth. And that's really what I hope to leave behind, that people go, this person, not only did she teach it, but she walked her talk.
Yeah.
You can't throw false stuff out there. You have to live what you're preaching.
Yeah, and what over the course of time, the people who aren't living what they're preaching, it'll eventually come to light. So you're
Yep.
an amazing example of that. And the final question is, what is the first step that people need to take on their walk to wealth to get to where they want to go?
The very first step you need to do is you need to have a vision and a vision. And it doesn't have to be, okay, just a vision of who you are and where you want to go. And then tell yourself, I've got to be from here to there is never a straight line in
Yeah,
life. It's never a straight line. So learn how to zigzag, but never lose your vision. Keep it.
amazing. Dr. Lynn, it was a pleasure getting to talk
Thank you.
today. It was a long time coming and time definitely flew. So I'm glad we was able to connect and find a time to, definitely tap into your wisdom, your expertise, your knowledge, and what you've been able to learn through the years. So I'm glad you were able to make appearance on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun, very interesting. I really enjoyed it.